in my last short, I've gotten a few requests on how I crocheted my sister this granny stitch sweater, so we're here today so I can show you how. More details in the video's description. I hope you'll enjoy. The sweater follows a top-down raglan sleeve pattern, so let's begin by working the yoke. Leave about a 15cm or 6-inch tail end and make a slip knot. I do this by wrapping my yarn over my middle and forefinger in an X. Then I'll work into the top left strand of yarn, pull through and make a loop. Remove my fingers and then I cinch my knot closed over my hook. Now I want to chain an oversized neckline. You can chain any multiple of 3 for this, so for example I'll chain 120. Here's my chain. I've used some stitch markers to help me keep count. And now I'll slip stitch into the first chain made to join my foundation chain into a round. Making sure my chain isn't twisted, I'll slip into the 3rd loop of my very first chain. You're welcome to join into the top loops as normal, but I find my way creates a stretchier foundation chain. I'll now remove these stitch markers, don't need them any longer, and now I'll chain 1, and into the base of the same chain I'll work a single crochet stitch. I'll continue to work a single crochet into the 3rd loop of every chain. If it's useful, add a stitch marker into the first single crochet made so you know where to join into at the end of the round. At the end of the round now, slip stitch into the first single crochet. Be sure to double check that your chain again isn't twisted in the round. That can sometimes happen. Okay, now let me show you how to work these double crochet clusters that make up practically the entire sweater. First, chain 3 to get to the height of a double crochet. And now at the base of the same stitch, work another 2 double crochet into it. I'm using US terms, so I'll begin with a yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops. Followed by a chain 1. Now I'll skip the next 2 stitches and work another cluster into the 3rd stitch away from my hook. Followed by a chain 1. And that's the pattern repeat that I'll continue to work across the entire round. To complete the round, work a slip stitch into the 3rd chain of the starting chain, and that's round 1 of our pattern repeat completed. So to create some shaping, we'll be increasing into 4 points in a raglan fashion. The way I do this, and bear with me, it's never failed me, is to make a rectangle with the seam in the center, and then at each point I'll add a stitch marker into the chain spaces. The two wider edges will be the front and back of the top, and the shorter edges will be the sleeves. If you're also following my measurements, the wider edges will have 12 clusters in them and the shorter edges 8 clusters. So it's nice and symmetrical. And now when I start my next round, I'll chain 3 again and turn my work so that my seam will lie straight. And then work another 2 double crochet into the chain space by my hook. Then I'll work my double crochet cluster repeat into the next chain space. Once I reach an increase point, I'll remove my stitch marker and I'll want to work 2 double crochet, chain 1, and another 2 double crochet, chain 1. I'll add my stitch marker back into the chain 1 space that I've worked and continue working my clusters for the rest of the round, making sure to work this special sort of cluster at each increase point. And I'll continue working my rounds this way to build out my yoke. You'll want to try it over your head once you've worked a handful of rounds to measure it against your or the intended wearer's body. We want to work it to a length where it almost reaches the armpits. Say you just need one more round in order for it to reach the armpits. So this will vary person to person. For my earlier sample, it took me 9 rounds. So once you get to this point, I'll show you how to split the sleeves. So let's now fast forward and talk about splitting the sleeves. I've worked several more rounds in this sample just to show you the shape that'll begin to emerge, and I just want to demonstrate that now I'm at the point where I just need one more round to reach my armpits, which is when I'll also split for my sleeves. I'll begin the round normally and work to the first increase point. Here, we'll want to join the 2 increase points together to create an opening. So I'll remove my stitch marker now, and in its chain space, I'll work 2 double crochet, chain 1, and then immediately move on to working the same pattern into the next increase point. So I'll remove the marker, I'll hold both points close together, and I'll work another 2 double crochet and a chain 1. Now I'll continue working my clusters until I reach my next increase point, and I'll do the same to create the opening for the other sleeve. Now you're welcome to try your work on, fit your arms through these 2 new openings and just see how it's fitting. If you happen to be using an animal fiber, something like wool, I wouldn't be too concerned if the fit is a little snug at this point, because after you block it or wash it, the yarn fibers will relax a little more and it should fit you well. In the next round of the body, just work over the join with your regular double crochet cluster and continue on with your pattern as usual. You'll want to continue working on the body of your top until you're satisfied with the length. For your reference, I worked an additional 30 rounds after splitting my sleeves before I wanted to add a split hem. So let me show you how we can work this optional step. First, I'm going directly to the cluster I had worked after splitting my sleeves, as that's the midpoint between the front and the back of my sweater, and I'm going to add a stitch marker into the chain spaces on both sides. Your actual sweater should obviously have many more rounds between this cluster and where you'll want to add a split hem. I just want to add them there so I know how far across to work to. As we've been working our rounds, our seam is in the middle part of the back of our sweater. So I'll tie off and then join some yarn to either side of your stitch markers. I'll begin by working a slip knot and chaining 4. This will count as the first double crochet plus a chain 1. And then I'll just work my double crochet cluster pattern all the way across until I reach the other side and meet my other stitch marker. And mirror the way I started by working just 1 double crochet into the chain space. That's the first row done. And now I'll chain 3 and that'll count as the first double crochet in a new cluster. I'll turn my work and continue to work another 2 double crochet into the chain space by my hook. And now I'll just continue working my clusters side to side until I reach my desired length, which was 8 rows in total for my sample. For demo purposes, this hem isn't going to be very long, but to finish, I'll just work 1 last double crochet into the 3rd chain of the previous row. And the very last step to finish off every opening of this sweater is to work 1 row of just single crochet. I'll chain 1 to turn my work, and then start that process. In between each cluster, I'll work 1 single crochet into the chain space. I'll also join yarn into the same marked chain space to work the other hem on the other side of my sweater. Okay, and now let's talk about the final technique of the sweater, working the sleeves. I'll want to join some yarn close to the armpit so that the seam is less visible once we wear it, so on either chain space. And then all I'd want to do is work my double crochet clusters into every chain space. For my particular sample, I didn't find the need to increase or decrease. Again, I'll make a slip knot and begin my cluster with a chain 3, which will count as my first double crochet. And then I'll complete the pattern for my double crochet cluster as normal in the same chain space. For my sample, I've continued with the same pattern round by round for 28 rounds in total. And then all I did at the end of my final round was to work a trim of single crochet to bind off the sleeves. That's it. So again, have a play with the length in which you want your sleeves to be, the main body to be, whether or not you want to add a split hem or not. And once you've finished all of these components, tie off, weave in any and all tail ends, and I'd also recommend steam blocking your new make before wearing it out. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.